What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down 3 tips to carry on every single role. So you know everything you need to do no matter what role you're playing to guaranteed get impact and climb, whether you have trash teammates, whether things just aren't working out for you, you're on a loss streak, and you want to reach that peak. This is the absolutely perfect video for you. So let's jump into it. But before we do, the GameLeap website is the one place for in-depth advanced VOD reviews, Grandmaster tips and tricks, and much more. We have tons and tons of content released daily on the GameLeap website, so do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, kicking it off in the first category we got to talk about, and it's the biggest tip that I got for you on each role. Now, on DPS, the biggest thing that you should be doing is consistently putting pressure on and punishing enemies that are out of position. When a McCree peeks you top right, it is your job as a DPS player to put a certain amount of pressure into him so he backs off. Now, do you have to kill him out of nowhere just like a god where you 180 double headshot him? No, you don't have to do that at all. But what you do have to do is put some of your attention, some of your time, and some of your damage into that McCree so that he can no longer maintain that space where he has clear lines of sight to not only your tanks but your supports in the back line. It is important that DPS keep other DPS in check while at the same time punish enemy DPS by forcing them away, and can also deal damage to things that get too far forward without the help of their team, such as isolated tanks or supports that are far too off to the side. A lot of DPS are under the presumption that they have to just, get kills instantly. Every time someone walks out of position, they have to kill that person right away. But that's not what contesting is, and that's not necessarily what you have to do every single time. And those kills will come to you if you're consistently pressuring, doing damage when you can, and especially targeting people that are, like I said, pushed too far forward, not in the safety of their team. Now, the next tip that I got for you is for the tanks. And what you need to be doing on a tank is creating pressure, space, and pushing forward the areas that your team deems safe. And a lot of players get this wrong because most people don't know what a tank is supposed to do or how to do what they're supposed to do, but I'm going to tell you right here. Well, the big thing that you need to understand is once an area becomes safe, safe territory that you claim that is not quote-unquote out of position like we talked about, once a tank claims that space, like a Reinhardt pushes up, anything that's behind the Reinhardt or in his vicinity behind, that is what we call safe territory, where the average amount of spam and ability fire and things like that, they might, sneak through the cracks here or there, but it's not an overwhelming amount of abilities that are just being pumped at you, and you're not that isolated target that is going to take the focus fire of enemy DPS or whoever could possibly damage you. If it helps you understand it a little better, imagine DPS are fighting for obscure positioning here or there, and tanks are the ones that go in after the fact or while the fighting is happening, and they take that space to basically make it so that the DPS could not move at all, but all of a sudden he's in a safe position because his Reinhardt has stepped 5 steps forward, and now the enemy would have to be right up on the Reinhardt to be able to fight the McCree. You kind of get the picture where it's a symbiotic relationship between DPS and tanks, and this is all strung together by, of course, the supports, which I gotta talk about my tip for them, and that is to only keep your team healed as much as they need to be. Now, that being said, it is your job to make sure that you're healing up your DPS, healing up your tanks, and helping them push forward, just like we talked about. And if your tanks are under immediate threat and they're critical, you need to just be pumping them with heals. Same thing with DPS. They need to be looked at, especially when they're weak coming back to the team. However, there's a lot of time in between there. There's a lot of time when the enemy is kiting back, or there's a lot of time when your team are healed up and you could be doing something else, and that's when you're going to be looking for more aggressive opportunities, which I'm going to talk about later in this video, but it's the #1 thing you need to master if you want to climb on support. Now, the next thing that we got to talk about is how to adapt your gameplay to carry on each role. First off, we're going to start with the DPS, and how you play your DPS and what DPS you even play really depends on tanks and supports. You see, some tanks are going to enable certain types of DPS. For instance, a character like Reinhardt can walk forward with the shield and protect certain characters that don't have any form of mobility or low forms of mobility, but can do a lot of damage on the front line. Think of someone like Hanzo or someone like McCree. They get to consistently be doing damage through the shield to the enemies while still being relatively safe behind the Reinhardt space he's creating. Now, if you change that tank up and switched it with something like a Wrecking Ball, now if the McCree wants to do any damage, he has to walk into the open where the only cover he's ever going to have is actual natural natural cover like obstructions and surfaces on the map, and that just prevents the areas he can take and how effective he can be, how much he can push up. I think you get the picture. Now that being said, however, what a wrecking ball does do is he puts pressure on the enemy front line, he pushes them back, and he does damage in the process while the enemy race cooldowns on him. Now, there are characters in DPS that can really benefit from that. If the enemy have used their sleep dart, their nade, you know, their stun, all these abilities, and they're all focusing, then someone who does burst damage or could get in with them is going to be very effective. Someone like Genji, someone like Reaper. These characters heavily benefit from the type of space that tank is creating. So you need to understand not only what is the characters that you could play that will go with the tanks, but also what the play styles of the characters are going to change, because you could still play Reaper with a Reinhardt. You just play behind your Reinhardt and poke at the shield, push up with your Reinhardt and brawl with the tanks. You could still play Hanzo with the wrecking ball, play from far away on off angles, play the high ground and try to rain down from above, maybe get a few cheeky shots in when he slams down. There are ways to adapt characters that don't inherently go with certain tanks and still get value out of them, but you have to think about this ahead of time, or else you're going to be completely lost trying to play on the front line as McCree when you have no shield, die, and then complain to your team when really it's your fault. Now, the next thing I gotta teach you about adapting is for tank, and a tank player needs to be thinking about several things, but the two most important things are the map and the tank partner. Now, first off, the map, and you just gotta understand that certain maps favor certain types of tanks and certain team compositions. For example, if you're thinking about something like Ilios, well, characters that can get a lot of value on that map would be something like a Roadhog, who can cook people in the well. I mean, that's a natural surface, and that's just a plus in Roadhog's favor. Characters that are a little bit weaker are traditionally really powerful characters. Something like a Reinhardt might not get as much value, because if you're pushing forward and the enemy have, you know, an Orisa, a Roadhog, or a dive, it's going to be hard for you to transverse through the spaces and the choke points to get to the enemy. So you got to think about, hey, maybe normally I'd be playing Rein, but on this map, maybe I shouldn't play Rein because it's not going to be able to get as guaranteed value as some other picks. And then you could also think, hey, my duo tank, and this is something that's really important, knowing what your duo tank is and how they are going to enable you, or how you're going to enable each other. For example, let's say you're playing something like Zarya. You have to ask yourself, okay, how am I going to build my energy? Because that's one of the most important things you need to be doing on Zarya. Depending on who your duo is, it might be incredibly difficult. For instance, if your duo is an Orisa, it's going to be really hard, unless that Orisa feeds and probably dies, for you to get any energy at all. And if that person's just feeding and dying and you're just getting like 40 energy out of the deal, that's not really worth it. Now, of course, there's always ways to adapt. Just like with the DPS, you could adapt with the tanks and still make characters, especially the ones that have high individual skill ceilings, characters like Zarya, characters like Roadhog or Wrecking Ball, where they can just work no matter what your tank duo is and no matter what map. But thinking about these things and thinking about how you're going to get value anyways is something that's going to better set you up for having more impact on tank on average. Now, the last thing that we got to break down in this category is for support. And the big thing that you need to understand about supports and adaptation is sometimes supports will just be absolute food for your enemies. You need to understand that DPS and sometimes even tanks, they are after you, and they're going to be after you all game, and it is your responsibility, not your teammates, to make sure you stay alive. And I know you might be playing Zen and you feel like you were getting dove without help again and again and again, but if you allow yourself to die over and over and over again without changing up your character or your playstyle, then the fault is really on you. You need to adapt your playstyle if you're not getting peeled, to either play a character that enemies could try to dive and it not work out and they put themselves in a bad position that your team can capitalize on, or you yourself, or you need to be playing in a way that that opportunity never presents itself. And you got to remember, there will be plenty of opportunities where your other support is the one that's getting farmed, and you as the secondary support can see that and say, hey, I've been through that. I know exactly what that person needs to stay alive. I know what exactly I can do. Maybe that person's a Zen and you're Ana, and you sleep the diver. You nade him and the enemy as he gets dove, and you turn that fight because you are aware and you're used to these situations. You know exactly what you needed that you didn't get before, so you can provide that for a future ally, and it could be the difference maker in actually climbing. Now, moving on to the last category that we got for you in this video, and it's the biggest mistakes that you are making. And first off, for DPS, the biggest mistake is trying too hard to get kills. I see this a lot when a team is like standing back. They're all 5 of them are back near the back of the cart, or they're not even pushing in, and a DPS is in the enemy's back back line, and he's like Tracer, and he has 2 people on him or whatever, and he says, I have 2 people on me, 2 people on me. Oh, Zen's one, and he's calling out random stuff, and he's just flying around, and he's trying so hard to get this 1 kill. And you know what happens? Before his team even gets there, he dies. Before his team even gets there, he pushes too far forward, puts himself too close to the enemy, too out of position, and just gets picked off as a result. You need to understand the fundamentals of a DPS. Remember, punishing enemies, dealing damage to them, and occasionally you will be getting these kills and a lot of these cleanups, especially when enemies are forced into terrible positions where they want to leave, they want to regroup, but they can't because they want to contest X. Or even more likely, the enemy is going to make a mistake if you're disciplined. This happens so much, just being disciplined, and enemies will just, you know, mess up. They'll peek you when they're low. They won't be able to kite soon enough. They won't know what's going on as you're doing damage to them, and you will get a kill. You don't have to fish so hard for these kills that it actually costs you your life, because I see far too many people that are trying to carry so hard on DPS, but at the end of the day, they're the ones that are actually throwing. Now, moving on to the biggest mistake that I got for you on tank, and this is not pushing in and taking free space. And this is the #1 mistake I see on tanks, where your DPS have got picks, your team has got picks, and you're still standing back, not pushing in. Pretty much as a general rule of thumb, if you have numbers advantage and you are at 50 HP or more, that's just an arbitrary number, but if you're at a reasonable health total, you should be pushing up. You should be pushing up and bringing the line of combat, the line of conflict further, because you got to understand, if you're a tank, whether you're a Reinhardt or a Zarya or a Roadhog, the enemy supports, the enemy DPS, they cannot stand where you're standing because they will just die, right? You demand that area. That's your area. And if the enemy tanks challenge you and you have more DPS and more heals because you have numbers advantage, then they're going to lose the head-to-head. If you are a tank at full health and they are a tank at full health and y'all are hitting each other straight up and you have 2 healers and they have 1, who do you think is going to win? And you have 2 DPS and they have 1, who do you think is going to win? Especially when you have that number, but a lot of times tanks will not push in and collapse on the enemy team fast enough, and one of the other DPS will get enough time to fish for that kill. Your team will kind of be lost in this aether where they want to push up, and maybe they do push up, but because you didn't capsize on their front line, one of your teammates get picked off or 2 of your teammates get picked off, and then you lose a fight that if you would have just pressed W, if you would have just identified, hey, we have an advantage, let's collapse on them, you would have won, but you didn't. And this is super important. This is probably the #1 tip that is guaranteed to get you diamond. I'm serious. You push forward when you have advantage, and you pull back and fish for picks when you don't have advantage, or just regroup all together, and you will climb to diamond just like that on tank. It really is that simple. Now we're going to the last tip, or the last mistake that we have for you, and it's on the support role. And the big problem that happens a lot is supports think that more healing will win a fight, and if they just keep healing and keep healing and keep healing, that is the way that they win a fight. But really, that is not. You're being far too reactive. Supports should really be looking to heal when they need to. Like I talked about before, you heal when you need to, but you're looking for these proactive plays. And what do I mean by that? And the thing is, remember, we're talking about pressure. We talk about pressure and space a lot in the DPS and tank categories, but it's the same way with supports. You need to understand that if you're Ana and you get a fat 3-man nade on the enemy, what are they going to do? Are they going to push into your team when they're 3-man naded? No, they're backing the heck up. You created that space, because when they back up, your team pushes forward. It's like a wave, push and pull, and that nade backs them up far more than you just healing your front line. Now, yes, if you stop healing your front line, what's going to happen? Your front line's going to collapse and they're going to be able to push forward. But if you keep your front line healed enough, that nade is going to have more impact on the enemy than it would have on your team. And it's the same way with many support abilities. A lot of them are very high impact. Things like Discord can be the difference between a Rhine getting low and getting healed up, or a Rhine just dying altogether. The difference between speed boosting in can allow you to collapse. Remember that slight advantage that I talked about before, where tanks don't push in and the enemies fish for a pick? Well, if you have a Lucio, to once you get that numbers advantage, you speed in your tank, now you capsize in a way where the enemy can't back up even if they play correctly. Now, a lot of times the enemies aren't going to play correctly. They're not going to back up, especially at lower ranks, but even if they do play correctly, that's what high-level players do and pro players do. They speed in, they snowball, and they get kill after kill after kill. Don't let anyone out, get all that ult charge, and in the next fight, they have a stock full of ults because they killed the enemy and they made sure that no one got out and they got all those free kills. Now, essentially, what I painted for you in this video is the picture of how the game of Overwatch is played, from DPS to tanks to supports, and I really hope that this gives you a really solid understanding of what you need to be doing on every single role. But if you have any questions, do yourself a favor, ask me in the comments down below, and go check out the GameLeap website because we have tons of in-depth VOD reviews where you can see DPS, tank, and support Grandmaster VODs, and you can see them step by step exactly their decision making, breaking it down, every single decision they make, so you know exactly what you're doing right and wrong in your games, and you can climb with ease. But that's all we got for you today. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm really grateful that you're part of our community. Please do us a favor, smash that sub. We're almost to 100K subscribers. But that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time.